is our theme, and we have an awesome speaker this morning. Caren is the founder and CEO of Gold Rush Vinyl and the new co-owner of Waterloo Records and Video. How cool is that? She moved to Austin in 2017, just like the rest of us. She got here as fast as she could. And she answered the renewed demand for vinyl records. When she opened Gold Rush Vinyl, that was well, she's going to tell you about that. But since then, she's pressed over 1 million records for independent artists. And she's very proud to be a 100% woman-owned company. So, yeah, where's my clappers? Yeah. Prior to all that, she did work at a small company called Google. Is that right, Google or Google? Okay. She worked within Google Music and did some awesome stuff. She'll probably mention that. But before that, I love it, she was at Paste Magazine, where she started, well, she didn't start there, but she had her own band management firm too. So she's been solidly in the music industry throughout her career. I love the fact that she's touched so many points of artists and musicians' journeys. But you should know this too, she's an entrepreneur, so she's serious about this. She holds an MBA. How many entrepreneurs hold an MBA in the room? One, two, yeah. Look how proud they are. Everyone who tells you to get an MBA, just remember that moment right there. Jeez. Anyway, she has an MBA from Harvard Business School where she now teaches a case study in using Gold Rush Vinyl as the case study. So that's really awesome. And because she's awesome, she was recognized by the Austin Business Journal as the best CEO in 2023. So for those job seekers, you want a good boss, right? Look for the best CEO. Are you hiring, Caren? Always looking. Look at that. It's all right. So you can talk to her about that too later. Well, enough of me. Here to share her thoughts on the intersection of parallel and creativity. Please help me welcome Caren Kelleher.
Good morning, Austin. I have to tell you, I met one of my very best friends at Creative Mornings about 6 or 7 years ago when we were hosting at Gold Rush Vinyl. I did not know him. We just started talking kind of like in these prompts, and now Patrick has become one of my very best friends in the world. So I hope today you'll meet a stranger and maybe make a new friend. I'm thrilled you're here, especially on a rainy day. Has been mentioned, I have two very different but big jobs right now. One is running Gold Rush Vinyl, manufacturing vinyl records, and now taking over Waterloo Records, Austin's iconic record store. And with that, building out a new store, new location. As Austin is changing, we had to move locations, so that's a huge project. And originally, I was really worried that that was going to split my time too much and that it was going to be difficult to manage both without feeling super fractured in my thinking. And what's actually happened instead is I've found that those two very different but moving in the same direction paths for me have really sharpened each business and made me also feel a bit more whole myself. Now instead, I can see the gaps, I can see the pain points of our industry, and I can also within that see the possibility. And I'm no stranger to really wearing two hats. Even as a kid, I was very, very analytical and also very artistic. This is my sister, she's in the back of the room, and she's going like this because she didn't know I was putting her in my slide deck. Or that I'm wearing her sweater today, so thank you, Megan. But as a kid, I was really, really good at math. This is a picture of me on family vacation reading the New York Times stock reports. Because in 4th grade, I learned how to trade stocks with my allowance money. My parents would let me call the stockbroker. And they'd be like, 2 shares of TCBY yogurt for $4, please. Like, the broker fees didn't even cover that, But my sister and I started trading stocks. And let me tell you, in 4th grade, I tried to give stock tips on the playground. Kids were way more interested in kickball. It did not make me many friends. But I was always really, really good at math. And then yet also, I was really good at painting and writing. And I had all of this creative energy. And I felt like a lot of times adults would say, like, what do you want to be when you grow up? As if you had to, pick one thing. I hate that question. I think it should be, who do you want to be when you grow up, right? Because we're so much more than one thing. But I was like, I don't know. I like painting, but I like art. I don't know. And then I discovered the Beatles. I love the Beatles' music. I just can't believe how prolific they were in their career. But really, this was around the time that the Beatles anthology came out, and I started to learn about the business of the Beatles, which was really fascinating. The way they got their rights back, how many times they reinvented themselves. I mean, they went from like the Mop Top Fab Four to the Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band in like 3 or 4 years. That's crazy because nowadays, most artists are lucky if they get one album out in that amount of time. So I became really, really interested with what is the business of music. And luckily, I had fantastic parents. They raised us in a household full of music. My mom loves Broadway shows. We'd listen to Broadway over dinner. My dad is a huge rock and roll guy and would take extra long car rides with me so that we could play the whole song. Some of his favorite records like Supertramp and Rush and AC/DC and stuff. Probably my mom didn't really want him playing for me, but it was kind of like our secret language. I did not have any musical talent myself, really. I peaked as the piccolo player in the high school marching band. But my sister is a trained opera singer. So my parents were really encouraging of music and also my crazy ideas, which I had a lot of as a child. And so I had this idea. I was like really into the Beatles, and I was like, well, they're Hard Rock cafes. Why is there not like a Beatles-themed restaurant? And so I told my parents I have this idea for a restaurant called the Octopus's Garden. And one of the best things about my parents is they never, ever have like shut down my ideas. Even Gold Rush Vinyl, by the way, which was a crazy idea to go start a vinyl factory with never having manufactured before. My parents instead were so encouraging, and they said, why don't you see how far you can take that idea? Draw out a business plan. What would be on the menu? So I like got to work, scribbling down what this would look like. And my parents saw it and they were like, this is actually a really good idea. And so they took it to a lawyer to see if we could get it protected. And instead I got a cease and desist letter from the Beatles. I was 12 years old. I'm sure they were like, oh, well, call us in a few years, But it was the first time I thought, oh wow, I can like combine my artistic ambition and my business skills. So maybe there's a path for me in this. And so when I went to college, I knew one thing. I wanted to work in music. I also knew I didn't want to work on stage. I wanted to be behind the scenes of it. And yet even then, when I went to college, people still were in my ear about like, you need a practical job. You're very good at business. And so I'm from the DC area, and I was like, fine, let's try an internship in politics. All I learned there is I hate wearing pantyhose and never want to wear a suit to work again the rest of my life. But it's so important, yeah, thank you. But it's so important also to find out what you don't like in life. I tell young people this, especially when they're in college, like, those are just data points that help you get to the thing that you're gonna do. And so I ended up at Emory University, and I was learning, about business, and in between running off to concert venues and, keeping up with what bands got signed at any given time, like it was the sports, scores. And had an opportunity to go to New York and work at a huge music company. And I came back so disheartened because I was like, gosh, that's more corporate than a real corporate job. Like, they don't really care about the music, they care about the numbers. And it was really shocking. I'd worked so hard to get there and then felt like, oh, is this really the thing for me? And thank goodness I met the founders of Paste magazine. If you didn't see Paste in its heyday, it was a magazine that came with a CD inside, which was all the artists that we were covering in the magazine. You couldn't buy your way onto the sampler, it was editorially chosen. And the idea was, as you get older, your want for music discovery doesn't change, but the time you have does. So let's help you find what we called signs of life in music, film, and culture. And it was a dream job. I remember though, I went for my interview and I was in a pencil skirt and heels because that's what they tell you to do in business school. You dress business casual. So I'm like tromping up the steps of this frat house essentially. And it's like posters and boxes and guys in band shirts. And I'm like, what am I doing here? And they said, come intern with us. Interned with them, and then ended up getting a full-time job. And it was the best job because it let me have these two sides of myself. I, on one hand, very business focused, was able to lead teams and come up with the things I had learned in school, but also get to work with the artists directly. To see the impact of when you do shine a light on talent that isn't getting in the mainstream, what kind of impact does that have? And I felt like that was a place that I really wanted to make a life for myself. There was one problem, and that's that the music industry was very rapidly changing. So this is a graph from the RIAA that shows the percentage of an artist's revenue that came from two different formats. The blue line is physical, the orange is digital. And you see how quickly things changed. For most of the 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s even, Most artists made their money off of physical products, CDs, vinyl, cassettes. They weren't making money in Napster days, so that's why it's not kind of reflected there. But suddenly when, digital subscriptions, iTunes started to come into play, the whole thing flipped on its head. And that was also true for magazines. And so I was at this inflection point and thought, this might be the end for me with music. Maybe I should go back to business school, sharpen my skills, and get a real job. And I had the opportunity to go to Harvard Business School, which was amazing, also because they gave me a very generous fellowship to go there. I was like, really? I figured they'd kind of have the attitude of that big music company that, by the way, did not pay me. Be like, everybody wants to work here, so you're gonna do it for free. And instead I had this chance to be in this environment with people very different than me, trying to sharpen my finance skills. And I thought I was gonna get out of music not only because of this, but because when I looked ahead in my career, I did not see any women that were giving a blueprint for what my life and my career could look like. This is a study from the Annenberg School from a couple years ago that shows that less than a quarter of all music executives are women. And in some cases, in some fields, it's even less than 10%. And this was done in 2021, so imagine like early 2000s, very, very different world. And so I thought it's time for me to transition and to get into a more tech job or consulting. And maybe one of the best things that happened for me is that the markets crashed that fall. I was in school in fall of 2008, and Wall Street just completely collapsed. And with it, all of the safe jobs. All the jobs, the recruiters stopped coming, and I thought, oh gosh, I'm supposed to have this, clear path to a new career, and that just dried up. So I had to make my own job. And what I ended up doing was a mismatch of things. I called all these entrepreneurs I knew in the music industry and was like, would you let me just shadow you? Can I just, see how you do what you do? And also started managing bands. My sister had found a band out of Cleveland, Ohio that we really liked, and they needed help. They didn't have business skills to get their career where it needed to go. I took them to South by Southwest, helped them navigate that, and started to kind of build my resume in a way that was like, okay, if I can't get a job at McKinsey, I'm gonna have to make my own. And what I learned through doing that was how many of my classmates were so jealous that I had a passion for something and I could have a career in it. They'd say like, gosh, I'm still trying to figure out, what I like because I've been working so hard all these years. And I realized, what, maybe, if I can't see a role model for myself, I can be that for someone else. And so I decided to stick with the music industry. And I got a phone call, thank goodness, from a small company called Google. They were like, we're building something, we can't tell you what it is yet, but we think you're gonna like it. And it turned out to be Google Music. One of the reasons that Google wanted me to join their team was because I had not stopped managing the bands on the side. And they said, you have real world perspective on these artists. It's gonna be very, very valuable for our product team. And so here again, I've got two hats on, working at Google on the engineering team and also managing bands. And again, I thought those things would be in conflict, but actually it made me stronger at my job. Because as I'm sitting in these rooms with brilliant engineers and product managers, some of the best in the world, I'm the one that's asking a different question. They're thinking in zeros and ones, and I'm saying, what's the artist gonna think about this? What would Beyonce think of this? Always an important question to ask. And that's when I started to realize something that's guided a lot of my career, which is creativity doesn't have to be the output, the product that you come up with. It can be asking different questions in a room full of people that are thinking the same way. It can be connecting dots that other people don't see. Oh, thank you. I'm not even halfway through. And one of the questions that I asked, well, on behalf of the artists we were working with, is why is digital music so hard for musicians? Here we go, we have all the music in the world in our hands at any given time, and yet musicians are struggling. And so I was giving this company presentation about the state of the music industry, and this is the slide I put up, just to show my colleagues the realities of being a musician today. And that was for the average American band to earn minimum wage at that time, they could either sell 100 vinyl records, have 368,000 Spotify streams, or 2.3 million YouTube views. That's a revenue equivalent. And I know a lot of artists that can sell 100 vinyl records. I don't know very many that can consistently get 2.3 million YouTube views. And then I had this aha moment. I was like, I've seen this, because when I was managing bands with my sister and we had merch on the table, that's real cash exchanging hands. You're not waiting 6 to 8 months for royalty statements. And that vinyl can be a really, really important revenue tool for musicians, let alone the sentimental thing that piece it has for artists. And so I started thinking more and more about that. And remembering, we couldn't get vinyl made when we tried as a band. Vinyl had had an explosive growth. Who's a vinyl collector in the room? Okay, you're my people. But vinyl had had an explosive kind of growth. It's been even more so since the pandemic. But it put this strain on factories. There wasn't enough manufacturing capacity. So I kept coming back to this. And I was also at a point in my career where as creative as I had been in the early part of my time in Silicon Valley, I was feeling completely burned out. I felt like a robot. It was so much zeros and ones in my life and not much creative spark. So I made a really tough decision. I saved as much money as I could and I quit my job. I did not have a plan. It was the first time in like 15 years where I gave myself permission to rest and to think, what do I really want to do? Who do I want to be when I grow up? Not what do I want to be? And what I kept coming back to was the vinyl opportunity. Because what I learned when I started researching vinyl was it's a very, very outdated industry. Most of the pressing plants that had survived were very outdated, older machinery, certainly weren't thinking about modern artists, and had filled up all their capacity with major label artists. So for the independent artists that really needed that revenue, they couldn't get it into a pressing plant. So I had this wild idea, why don't I start a pressing plant? I was sitting just drawing it out and took it to a bank. This is a real story. I took this business plan to a bank and was like, I would like to start a pressing plant. And they said, here's $500,000. And I called my family and I was like, I think I just committed to starting a vinyl pressing plant. And they were like, what? Did you draw the plan out all the way like the Beatles restaurant? You know what you're doing? And when I started to look for a place to build it, Austin immediately came to the front of my mind because I'd had so many wonderful experiences here, but it also was a town that had in the 70s brought together the hillbillies and the hippies. It was this very uniting community and I knew I'd be very welcome there. So I got to work figuring out how the heck I was gonna build a vinyl record pressing plant. And I thankfully found a lot of talent down here. There's so many wonderful people. And one thing that disarmed me about Austin when I first moved here was people were just so nice. People would say, do you want to get coffee? And I'd be like, what do you want from me? Because in California, it's so transactional. And Austin was also great because my family's, was on the East Coast. I was on the West Coast. It was this middle ground. It just felt really, really safe to build something here and build a life for myself. And luckily, vinyl kept growing. And we found a real, real connection here with artists, with the music industry. Because while the rest of the world was moving into digital, more screens, more subscriptions, people just kept coming back to vinyl. When I first started pitching the idea of, and I very truncated the story, by the way, about raising the money, but it happened pretty quickly with one person who believed in me, but a lot of people said, this is just a fad, this is not gonna stay around, prove it. And it's the sentimental reason that vinyl has really taken off. A record isn't just music, it's part of an identity. When you see your records on a shelf at home, it says something about you, and about, people enter your home, they know something about you in a way that your phone that's hidden in your pocket where no one can see it doesn't give that sense of personality. And so it's no surprise a lot of the work we do at Gold Rush now is these cool color splatters and variants. Everybody wants something completely unique and different because of what it says about you as a person. A vinyl record tells a story and it gets passed down from generation to generation. And yet streaming builds reach while the vinyl builds the relationship, and they can coexist, and they do. So many artists are finding audiences for their vinyl because of streaming. And streaming is also giving way for this moment to say, wait a second, I don't want to be digitally connected all the time. And it's a real honor for me to get to do that for my life now, to build a career in that. Which takes us to Waterloo, where every day when I'm in there, I see these young girls who remind me so much of myself when I was digging through record crates as a kid. And they'll say, oh, I saw this artist on TikTok. And it's there that I see this connection. What's so special about vinyl now is, when we get these young buyers into the store, and they're like, wow, all this other music that they've never discovered. And so my life is a bit messy right now because I have a construction project going at Waterloo and also my work at Gold Rush. But one of the things I think I've learned through this journey about creativity is you don't have to pick one thing, and it's not necessarily about the output. It's about problem solving. I have to some days go in and fix pipes or do maintenance on boilers, which I didn't have that in my business plan at all. Or it might be talking to a record label about the economics of what they're doing. It could be completely different, but that's the creativity that my life has now taken on. And perhaps the most creative thing I've done with my life is to build a life where I can be many things, not all at once, but it can all be enough together. And to find that, the tension between the two parallels of my life is where some real magic can happen. Thank you.